Ladles and jelly spoons, welcome back to Badgerworks. Today, this. This is an Airfix 1/72 scale Curtis Tomahawk Mark II-B. One of their starter sets that includes the paints and brushes and whatnot. And we're going to do something a bit different with this. You may recall that a while ago I built an X-Wing fighter from Star Wars in an RAF colour scheme. And today we're going to return the favour, as it were, and we're going to paint this to look like an X-Wing. Now, people have done this before. Invariably they use Spitfires, which I suppose is a fairly logical choice, but I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different. I bought this Tomahawk in, it was either Lidl or Aldi, I can't remember which. They were selling them, as they do sometimes, for a very small amount of money, and I bought this one because I've never built a Tomahawk, and I didn't really want to just build it straight out of the box, so I've been keeping it to do something slightly more interesting with it, and so today's the day. Yeah, we're going to basically try and make this look like, or well, not exactly like an X-Wing, but something like an X-Wing. So yeah, let's get on with it. Right, so here are the instructions. 1/72 gift set. They seem to have actually upped their game with these with these starter set instructions, because they're actually in colour now, which they never used to be, or partially in colour anyway. Yeah, so it's like half of it is just saying the same thing in 100 different languages. But yeah, it's all fairly straightforward. Although I have to say, some of these symbols I am finding slightly bizarre. Like this one here, I don't know whether you can see that. It's got what looks like a piece of paper, a mouse, and then an OK sign, and it's like, right. And then over here you've got a folder, an egg timer, and then a little, it's just like, really? And then this one's got a keyboard on it. It's like, what's that all about? I have no idea what any of these things mean. They don't seem to actually be listed anywhere, but anyway, whatever, it should be fairly simple to put together. I just found that quite comical. It's got them here as well. It's like, bits of paper and I don't know. I really don't know. Anyway, yeah, so that's the instructions. What else have we got? We got the decals, obviously. Here, fairly standard fare for these sort of things. We won't actually be using these because I've actually printed some decals. And so yeah, but I'll show you those later. And just actually on the subject of decals, if anybody has an issue with the way I say decals, I don't care. Quite frankly. Look, I get a lot of people saying to me, oh, it's decals, not decal, whatever. I don't care, all right? I'm old and I'm not going to change, so don't bother telling me. If it bothers you that much, don't watch. But anyway, these markings that come in the kit are for 112 Squadron RAF. So if you wanted to actually make, a more historically accurate aircraft, then you've got these. But as I say, we won't be using these. Now let's have a look at what else we've got. So we've got the brush, Humbrol number 2. These, as I mentioned before, actually, they're quite nice brushes. They're worth keeping. And paints and glue, which we won't be using. But again, they're there if you need them. So at least you can literally just build this thing out of the box. So one of these days I might actually do an out of the box build of one of these starter kits just for the fun of it. But anyway, not today. Right, let's have a look at the model itself. Right, so here we are. Let's open this up. Where's the, oh, there it is. Right, there's all the glass bits. I know I mention this every time, but I understand why they put them in another bag. It's to protect them from getting scratched, but it's like, really, do we need 2 plastic bags? But anyway, whatever. Yeah, so this actually, I've had a quick look at the instructions, and it looks like this goes together in a very similar fashion to the Zero. Insofar as you basically, you build up the cockpit on, you build the wings, you build the cockpit, and then you put the fuselage onto the wings, which I actually think is quite a good way of doing it. It makes it a little bit easier to put together. But anyway, that's beside the point. It looks reasonably good. Quite a lot of detail on it. Not much in the way of flashing. Now there is a pilot figure, and I think I might actually put him in, but I think we'll obviously paint him up to look a bit more like a sort of, you know, Rebel Alliance with the orange jumpsuit and the white helmet and everything. I'm not going to do all the details on the helmet. I've seen people do the details on the helmets and these things at this scale, and it's just, it blows my mind. But yeah, we're not doing that. That's way too much like hard work. But yeah, we'll see how we go. Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is we'll put this together. We'll do the interior in the sort of standard, you know, RAF cockpit green and all the rest of it. We'll do the pilot as much as we can to look like an X-Wing pilot, and then we'll paint the outside of it. So let's get on with it. Right, so you'll have to excuse the voiceover. We've got quite a lot of building work going on around our way at the moment, and we're like 3 sets of builders, and all of them seem to be in some kind of competition as to who can make the most noise. So I'm having to record this voiceover separately. But anyway, that's beside the point. So we're starting as we do normally with the cockpit. It all goes together very easily. It's a fairly basic model, to be honest. Yeah, fit the cockpit onto the wings. As I mentioned earlier, it's very similar to some of Airfix's other kits that work in this regard. I think it's actually quite a good system. So cockpit goes on first, and then we can start looking at the pilot while the glue's drying on that one. So as I said, I'm going to do him as like an X-Wing pilot. So I'm using this life color Rust Light Shadow, which is a nice kind of, it's quite orangey without being too orange, if that makes sense. And the nice thing is, because it's designed to be airbrushed, it's actually quite thin, and it almost acts as its own wash, which is quite nice. So we'll put that on as a base coat first. Do his boots and a few other little details in Citadel Chaos Black. Again, you won't even be able to see most of this, but it's really just to avoid having any white bits showing. If anyone looks in the canopy, that's the main thing. So we'll do his boots with the Chaos Black, and then move on to the rest of it. For the hands and the face, I decided to try out this Cadian Flesh Tone, which I mentioned in a previous video. You'll have to excuse this bit. The camera didn't like focusing. I think it's because the paint bottle was on the bench and the camera could see it, and it kept trying to focus on that, but sorry about that. One interesting thing about this figure, he has virtually no facial features, which was a bit of a problem, but I don't think it's really going to matter too much. But yeah, he's got like a few dents where his eyes should be, and that's basically it. So yeah, anyway, moving on. I'm trying out this Corax White for his helmet and for his vest webbing, whatever, I'm not quite sure what you would call it. It's interesting colour, this Corax White, because it's actually like an off-white. It's almost slightly grey, which I quite like, because it means it's not so bright as just like a plain white. So I think it will work quite well for this. And once I'm done with this, once it's all dry, I'm going to put a wash over it. I didn't actually film that, unfortunately, but I did put a very light wash over the whole model, just to pick out some of the high and low lights. And now moving on to the model itself. So what we're going to do here is spray the inside with the cockpit green, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to spend a massive amount of time on this, because quite frankly, once it's all together, you can barely see it.
So there's really not a lot of point spending a huge amount of time on this. I do sometimes spend a lot of time on the cockpits, you know, for my own, you know, just because I like doing it. But in this particular instance, it's really not necessary. So yeah, I'm just going to give the whole thing a coat of the cockpit green. Then I'll seal it. I'll put a basic wash on it, and that'll really do for it. So yeah, here's the X22, which I find works very well for this kind of thing. So once that's dry, some panel line accent color, just to pick out all the details, which again you won't even be able to see, but I do it because I know it's there. So that's all, all there is to it, really. So yeah, the inside of the cockpit, the walls, the floor, and all the rest of it. Get some panel line color, and once that's dry, we'll move on. So I will put one of the kit decals on this, which is the instrument panel, which is what's going on here. I'm not going to go in too much detail about the decals just yet. I'll talk about them more later when we put the main ones on the outside. But this is, I think, pretty much the only kit decal that I used was this one. And again, you can't really see it when it's in there, but I think it would notice if it wasn't there, so it's worth doing. And once that's on, just coat the whole thing with a flat matte varnish, and then we can start putting it all together. So as I mentioned before, there are a few Airfix kits that go together like this. So you basically build the cockpit on the wings, then put the fuselage together, and then put the fuselage over the wings, and it goes together like that. I quite like it, actually. I think it's a good way of doing it. One thing when you're putting fuselages together, a lot of people complain about the fact that they don't go together very well. And to be fair, this one could have gone together better. But basically, if you just start at one point and then kind of work your way in a circle around the seams, you'll find it will go together a lot easier. And I've found that that's a good way to avoid a lot of issues when it comes to fitting fuselages together. So yeah, you can certainly give it a go and see how you get on with it, but it certainly works for me. So once we've got all this buttoned up, we can move on to the next bit. You see that's all gone together quite nicely now. This is the air intake going on under the nose. Again, this wasn't the greatest fitting part, but with a bit of finagling and a judicious application of the Tamiya extra thin cement, which is great because it actually melts the plastic, so you can put the glue on and then actually use that melting action of the plastic to get the piece, you know, right into place properly. So, which is something you don't get with a lot of sort of plastic glues. They don't work like that. This is a welding bond rather than just sticking the parts together. It actually melts the plastic, so it does allow for a certain amount of fudge factor, as it were. And now we can put the fuselage on to the lower wing. Again, not the greatest fitting part, but I didn't want to start shaving bits off because I didn't want to end up with any gaps. So again, using the melting properties of the glue to get a good tight fit on these bits helps immensely. It does require a little bit of force sometimes to get all the bits to go together properly, but it goes in the end. Top half of the wings goes on. These went on fairly well. There were some fairly nasty gaps around the inner edges of the wing, which you'll see in a moment when I turn it over. But that we can solve later with some filler. But apart from that, it actually went together reasonably well. I mean, considering it's a sort of fairly cheap starter kit, it actually went together quite well. but you can see there's a fairly nasty gap at the top of the wing there on the leading edge. But yeah, it is what it is. This is the top cover going on with the guns and whatnot. Again, not the best fitting part, but not terrible. I've seen far worse. I didn't actually have to cut this or shave it or anything like that. It was just a case of putting it on and gluing it in place. This bit was tricky. This is the like the air vent underneath, and it took me quite a while to get this on and get it in the right place, because it did not want to go in the right place. But there we are. It's on there now, and yeah, now we can start filling some of these holes. This is Mr. Dissolved Putty. It's basically it's like a thick paste, and you put it on with a brush, and it's absolutely fantastic stuff. I actually ordered this from Japan. I think you can actually get it a bit nearer to home now, but it's great stuff, because you just basically put it on with a brush, and I'll show you in a moment a great way to use it, because it basically pretty much eliminates the need for sanding when it comes to putties. So you just fill all the gaps, and you can see here, as I mentioned earlier, there's some fairly nasty gaps around the wing roots. But you just put this stuff on fairly thick, work it into the gaps, and yeah, there's a neat little trick for cleaning it up. Basically, leave it to dry for about 20 minutes or so, then take a cotton bud, soak it in some isopropyl alcohol, and then just rub it over the top, and the filler basically dissolves. and yeah, it's like magic. It's a very good technique. It takes a bit of practice, but you can get it to a point where you can basically smooth off the filler, and you don't actually have to sand anything. It works really well. So yeah, a bit more assembly, putting the tail on, all fairly basic stuff. Just put it on, make sure it's all straight, and yeah, not really a lot to say about this part. Yeah, it's just mainly is a case of making sure that the rear elevators are in the right place. I decided to change the prop a little bit, because I wanted to look like the prop was spinning. So I decided to try something a bit different here. So what I'm doing is snipping off the prop blade, and then I'm going to take my razor saw and basically cut a slot in the end of the protruding stump, as it were, of the prop blade. And then later on, you'll see I'll fit some acetate prop blurs, I suppose would be the best way to describe them, and it's quite a good effect. It's the same thing that I used on the Skytrain, so I'll put a link up to that, and there's a bit in there about how I made them. But if anyone's interested, I'll do another video specifically on that. There's all different ways of making like blurred props that I've seen other people do, so it's something I'd like to sort of work on a bit more myself. But yeah, here I'm just basically cutting two slots and then joining them together to make a like a wider slot for the acetate to go in, but you'll see that go on a bit later on. And once that's put aside to dry, I'm now moving on to painting the aircraft itself. So we start off with a gloss black base, because I want to start with a bare metal finish, because we're going to be doing some paint chipping later, and it's a good way to give the effect of the aircraft being made of aluminium. So a nice liberal coat of a black primer, sorry, and then once that's dry, we can put on our all-clad lacquer. Now I really do like these lacquer finishes. I mean, I don't have any affiliation with all-clad, but I do use their lacquers quite a lot, and because they always give very good results. They're very easy to use, They're almost idiot proof, so never had a problem with them. Once that's on and dry, we give it a coat of gloss varnish to seal it, because we're going to be giving it a fair amount of abuse. And then once that's dry, hairspray. This is cheap stuff from the pound shop. Was it the pound shop? Somewhere like that anyway. I think this was about 75p, that hairspray. And then our first colour coat, which is Royal Light Grey. Originally I was going to do it white, but I thought that might come out a bit too bright, so I decided to go for this light grey instead. And there's something that's worth noting with this is once it's got the matte varnish on at the end, it will actually lighten up the grey quite a lot. You'll see it at the end, but it's quite an interesting effect. So this will come out a lot lighter than it looks now. Moving on, this is masking up for the identification stripes on the wings. On the X-wing, the stripes are in a distinct pattern, and obviously it's the number of stripes denotes the call sign of the aircraft. So this being red 5, we need 5 red stripes. So what I'm doing is using some 3mm masking tape, and basically putting a strip down, using another strip as a spacer, then putting a further strip, and so on, until we end up with equally spaced bits like that. Then we can switch to our red paint, mask up the rest of the aircraft so we don't get overspray everywhere, and then spray the red. Again, I've gone a slightly different route to the source material, because I wanted to follow the panels on the aircraft wing, because I think it made more sense to do it that way than to just sort of blindly copy the X-wing. Hopefully you'll see what I'm trying to achieve, and that's basically how it's ended up like that. And what I'm doing now is starting to chip the paint. So basically, once the paint's had a chance to dry, we wet it with some water to reactivate the hairspray, and then I'm using an old brush with some fairly stiff bristles, and I cut them down. I use this brush all the time for this. It works really well. And basically just gently rub it across the surface, and it lifts off the top coat of paint, revealing the silver paint underneath, to make it look like the paint's rubbed off. So yeah, it works really well. You can also here using a cocktail stick, which works very well to sort of get, you know, some very fine control on where you want the scratches and things to be around the edges of panels and whatnot. But yeah, there's all kinds of different ways you can do it. The main thing is patience and be gentle with it, because if you rub too hard, you can blow right through the whole lot and go back to the plastic. So just take your time. One of the things I found is that once it starts to go, it'll go really quickly. So it might take a while for it to start chipping, and then once it starts to chip, it will go very quickly. So you need to be patient and gentle with it, because otherwise you'll take far too much paint off and you'll just ruin the whole thing. So yeah, patience is the is the watchword when doing this, which is interesting for me to say because I am the most impatient person in the world. But yeah, you can see there around the wing roots, I've gone a lot heavier, because obviously that's where the pilot and the ground crew and whatnot would stand up on the wing to get to the cockpit, and then the rest of it is just as much as you see fit, really. I mean, because for this particular application, these aircraft are supposed to be not massively well maintained. They're having to move around a lot, and so as a result they would be extremely battered, but obviously for whatever your project is, you can do as much or as little as you like. So that's as much as I chose to go with this so far. I think it looks quite nice, quite beaten up, and now we can fit the glass, and then there'll be some more colours going on and some more paint chipping. But yeah, next step is to put the glass and the pilot in. I see lots of conversations of people saying, you know, what glue should I use to put glass on? I just use the Tamiya extra thin, and it works fine for me. So anyway, this is the pilot going in, because we need to put the cockpit on and seal it so that we can paint it. So that's him comfortably ensconced. And once he's in place, we can fit the cockpit again, the canopy with the extra thin. I didn't actually film the masking of the canopy. I apologise for that, but it's fairly basic. So now for some more colours. One of the things I've noticed with the reference pictures is, again, because they're supposed to look old and worn and so on, the X-Wings tend to have different coloured panels, like they've been replaced. So that's what I'm doing here, is just a couple of random panels in some different colours, just to look like they've been like cannibalised from other aircraft. So just not a huge amount. It's like, you know, one or two here and there that I'm doing. Firstly with this ocean grey, and then I did some more using RAF light blue. One of the reasons I chose this light blue is because it looks to me like the canopy on the source material, the source X-Wing, is actually light blue. It's either a light blue or a light grey. It's a bit difficult to tell. But same thing, just a couple of panels, just done in a different colour, just to make it look like it's had parts cannibalised from other aircraft. And then once that's done, again, just chip the paint to match what we'd already done, and end up with quite a nice result, I have to say, even if I do say so myself. So yeah, that's what we look like so far. I think it's coming along quite nicely. So yeah, you can see again, as I mentioned earlier, I've gone very heavily around the wing roots because that's where everybody would be standing. And once that's done and it's dried, another coat of gloss varnish to protect it, and also to give us a good base for the decals to go on. So as is usually the case, I'm using the Mr. Mark softer and setter for the decals. I bought this stuff ages ago and it works really well. These are the decals that I printed. I actually decided to go with the different identification numbers, because I printed some in light grey and some in black, and I tried the light grey ones and they were almost invisible. You couldn't see them. So in the end I decided to use the black ones, but anyway, that's beside the point. The process of putting them on is exactly the same. So these are, as I say, ones I've printed myself. I basically took measurements from the kit decals and then scaled these ones accordingly. It's kind of funny because obviously with the X-Wings and whatnot, you don't actually see, you know, these kind of, you know, roundels and things on them. But I thought, because I wanted to do like a mishmash of RAF and, you know, Rebel Alliance, it seemed to make sense to put these on like this, and you know, to sort of maintain that kind of hybrid look, as it were. So I was actually going to put some roundels on the wings as well, but I decided not to bother in the finish because I think it would have made it a bit too busy. But here's the identification numbers going on. Now obviously normally with RAF, you know, vehicles or aircraft of this period, it would be 3 letters, but I decided to change it slightly because I wanted it to basically be Red 5. So the 2 letters are RD, and in a minute you'll see the 5 going on, which is which gives us our registration number of Red 5. So putting the decals on, fairly basic. This decal paper is just some stuff I got from eBay. It's nothing special. It's just laser decal paper. My printer's not great, unfortunately, otherwise I would print decals more often, but it works very well for solid colors, so it works for this. So there's the 5 going on, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, that gives us our red 5. But yeah, the decals go on. Decal setter, put the decal in place, use a cotton bud to, you know, push out any air and excess setter, and also to settle the decals into any panel lines and recesses and whatnot. Despite the fact this is sort of cheap decal paper, actually they're really nice and thin, and they work really, really well. I've always been very impressed with this kind of paper. It works fantastically well. So once they've had a chance to dry, I'm now hitting them with the edge of a blade and just kind of scuffing them up and, you know, distressing them to make it look like the paint's wearing off, because obviously, you know, on a real aircraft these would be painted on, not stuck on like this. So it's a case of just going around the edges and just, you know, distressing them to make them look like the paint's wearing off. So it's just a case of just scratch away at it very, very lightly. I mean, it's almost just letting the weight of the blade do all the work. I'm not actually pressing on it at all. And then take a brush and wipe over it, and you can see it gives a very nice, you know, distressed effect to the decals. So yeah, very pleased with how these came out. So, and once again, once that's done, another coat of gloss varnish to seal it all, and then we'll move on to weathering. Now the weathering for this is going to be done with oils. These are Crawford & Black oils that I get from the works. They're very good actually, because they don't have a lot of oil in them. They have a lot of pigment. I suspect that if you actually wanted to use them for oil painting, they probably wouldn't be all that great. But for this kind of thing, they're actually perfect. So if you're in the UK and you've got a works near you, go and buy some. They're great. But basically just put them on with a brush. This is just an old, you know, Chinese brush that I got from Wish or somewhere. Put a bit on, and then this is a cheap makeup brush, a blending brush, because, you know, it's designed for blending, which is exactly what we're doing here. So it works really well. And then just work the pigment to exactly where you want it. So I find it's good to work both. Don't just drag it backwards, but actually work it forwards as well. So you'll see I'm actually going backwards and forwards with the brush rather than just dragging, you know, in one direction. And the great thing about it, and again, this is the reason for using the gloss varnish, is if you don't like the way it comes out, you can literally just wipe it off with a tissue and start again. I mean, you'll see here I'm about to put some more on because I want it a little bit thicker. I want it, you know, to control where the color goes. So it's the great thing about using the gloss varnish as a base, is that you can add or subtract to your heart's content. So yeah, so we've done some gun smoke and some exhaust smoke, and same again on the underside. So where the guns are, and also where the empty cases would come out of the wing, same deal again. And I also switch in a moment to some burnt umber to add some like oil streaks and dirt and, you know, just general grime really. But again, you can do as much or as little as this as you want, depending on how, you know, dirty you want your aircraft. I want this to be, you know, fairly sort of filthy looking. If you look at the X-wings, especially in, you know, the episode 4, the X-wings are absolutely filthy. So I wanted to reflect that in this. So that's why they're getting quite a lot of quite a lot of oil on them. But yeah, it's just, you know, a mixture of some black, some burnt umber, and sometimes a mix of the two. And then again, just go over it with the blending brush. Blend it as much or as little as you like to get the effect that you want, and then, you know, you can add more or wipe it off however you want to do it. So yes, it's all coming together very nicely. So again here, same deal again, just using different colors just so that it's not quite so monochromatic. using, you know, various blacks and browns and so on. I mean, obviously the brown is very good for oil streaks, and the black is good for, you know, soot and things like that. So, and then using various combinations of the two to just to create a bit of variation. So, but I see a lot of people asking about like oil weathering and stuff like that, so I thought I'd actually spend a bit of time in this video, because obviously this particular aircraft is designed, you know, is meant to look absolutely filthy. So, and this is very basic sort of, you know, oil weathering. I mean, you can go very detailed with it, and there's all kinds of different techniques you can use, but this is the basic of oil weathering, you know. And again, it's a good way to practice and to get started with oil weathering, and to give you the effects that you're looking for on your models. So, and as I say, the great thing about it is because it's over the top of a gloss varnish, if you don't like it, you just wipe it off, and you know, it's like it was never there. So yeah, so yeah, coming along very nice. We're actually not that far from the finish now. I mean, you could also use pigment powders and stuff like that if you wanted to, but I don't really see there's a lot of point at this stage. So here you can see what it looks like after I spent a while dirtying it up, doing the underside as well. There's a lot more oil streaking on the underside because obviously oil would flow downwards. And then yes, oh yes, the propeller. Nearly forgot about that. So here you can see I'm attaching the blurred blades with a bit of super glue. So it's basically a case of dab of super glue on the end of the blade, and then putting it into the slot that we cut earlier. I have painted the prop boss a matte black, and I'll touch it up again afterwards once the glue's dried. But sometimes it's a bit fiddly to get the props, the blades into the slots, but just persevere with it, it'll go in eventually. And once they're all in place, as I say, you can just touch up the where the glue is with a brush and a bit of the matte black, and it gives you a nice sort of blurred propeller effect. So as I say, these are the same props that I used on the Skytrain. So if you want to see how I made them, go and have a look at that video. And yeah, this is pretty much the last stage now, is the matte varnish, and you can see there, hopefully you can see it, that the grey has lightened up. Now we've knocked the shine of the gloss off it, it's actually lightened up that grey quite a lot. So I think it's come out quite nicely. And pretty much the last step is to remove the masking tape from the canopy, and reveal our pilot sitting in there very patiently waiting to go and fight the forces of the evil empire. One of the things I was slightly concerned about when doing this was whether or not I'd be able to actually get all of the masking tape off, because obviously some of it overlaps. But as it turned out, it came out fairly easily. You can see here, this was the bit I was worried about because it goes underneath the other part of the canopy, but it actually came out quite well. Just gave it a little pull and it popped straight out. So, and there it is. I put it on a flight base, which is one that I've had for years. I mean, this was like when I was a kid. So I just drilled like a 2mm hole in the bottom of the aircraft and stuck the flight base on it. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how this has come out. Actually, I think it's a good hybrid between RAF and Rebel Alliance. And this is the first in a short series, so I'll be doing some more of these in the near future. So hopefully this has been of interest to you guys. It's the kind of thing I think a lot of people have been asking to see. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. And thanks very much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.